a few progressions which I should imagine many of you will think are sort of familiar but sound a bit weird. And the reason I'm playing them is because they're by J.S. Bach. And they are part of a prototype for the famous first Prelude in C major, one of the most famous pieces of music ever composed. And today I'm going to explain the first Prelude and reveal this earlier version, this original version, which is really a kind of sketch version. But I think it's incredibly revealing about the nature of human creativity and about J.S. Bach in particular. So I hope you'll be really, really interested. It's an exciting topic. And let's get going. I'm Matthew King. Welcome to the Music Professor channel. I'm here with Loki, and we're going to be talking about Bach's first Prelude in C major. And I'm wearing a Bach t-shirt. It's actually not Bach's own signature. It's a signature that was devised by musicologists in the 19th century, but it's quite fun because here you have a normal treble clef, a G clef, with, you can see this note in the middle, and with the B flat next to it, that is in German B. Then if we go round clockwise to this clef, this is a tenor clef. So these two lines here surround the C line, and this is therefore A in the tenor clef. Those of you who are cellists, you'll know that that's an A in the tenor clef. As we go round this way, we have the alto clef, familiar to viola players, of course, and with the middle line, that of course is C. So you've had B-A-C, and then finally we have another treble clef here with a natural, and in German that becomes H. So we have B from this angle, A from this angle, C from this angle, and H from that. So it all spells Bach. So the same note is Bach. It's in the form of a cross, of course, and it feels as if there's this perfect unity in the one note head. And so it sort of distills in one clever form of sort of musical signature Bach's name and sort of represents him, the ultimate unifying composer, who's also, of course, famously a deeply devout Christian, and much of his work reveals the Christian story in a kind of depth that no one else has ever approached. Check out the video we made at Easter time about the Passions. Again, rather like the St. Matthew Passion, builds towards that extraordinary moment where the chorus comes in with Herr, Lord. And you really sense Bach's absolute commitment to the story, a story in which he feels himself to be a part. And I hope to talk more about that side of Bach's creativity in the future. If you like the t-shirt, we have a special deal with Amadeus Apparel, and you can order a t-shirt with a discount if you use the Music Professor code, and the details are below in the video description. So let's talk about why the first Prelude in C major is so important. We'll say a little bit about the well-tempered Clavier, and then we'll go on to look at the different versions of the Prelude. So in 1722, Bach completed his first book of the well-tempered Clavier. So that's to say 24 Preludes and Fugues, one for each key, major and minor. So you have C major, C minor, C sharp major, C sharp minor. D major, D minor, and so on. So it's one of many examples in Bach's output of this wonderful, and this is part of Bach's extraordinary genius. And I make no apologies for using the word genius. That's a word that I've discussed a lot on the channel recently. But in Bach, this is human creative genius at its very highest, and it's multifaceted. One of those facets of Bach's genius was his extraordinary ability to create these extraordinary cycles which in themselves represent a kind of a universe of musical invention, an array of almost every possible, conceivable kind of musical invention. So with the first book of Preludes and Fugues. And then the second book, because 10 years later in 1732, he had another go. Not content with one cycle, he did a second cycle, just as good as the first. Possibly even more extraordinary, the second book of the Well-Tempered Clavier. And that's why the two books of 24 pieces, Preludes and Fugues, are sometimes called the 48, because you have this complete set of 48. And this wonderful sense of creating a universe is something Bach does over and over again. Think of the Art of Fugue, for example, his last work. Or the Musical Offering, where he presents a theme that he was given by Frederick the Great of Prussia to improvise on. I'll talk about that in another video. But he distills it in the form of all kinds of canons. This amazing trio sonata and a 6-part fugue. All these wonderful different ramifications, these different possibilities are explored, as if he's exhausting every possible avenue. And this is the nature of a great composer, that you can take one thing, one theme, one idea. It's the same with the Art of Fugue. One basic idea and run with it and exhaust it only through an absolutely systematic journey. So the first book of The Well-Tempered Clavier is one of the first of these monumental cycles that he undertook. And when I play Bach on the piano, people often say, oh, you should be playing on the harpsichord and stuff. In fact, we do have a harpsichord. We've been given a harpsichord. The channel is very grateful a donor has given us a harpsichord, but it needs a little bit of restoration, so I'm not playing a harpsichord today. Besides which, Bach encountered forte pianos, the ancestor of this, at the court of Frederick the Great in the 1740s, and he was delighted by the instrument. He loved the fact that it had all these dynamic shadings, and with good reason, because I believe, and many other musicians believe, that the piano is the ultimate keyboard instrument for Bach because of its dynamic capabilities. But what he meant by clavier, when he said well-tempered clavier, was essentially any keyboard instrument. So these are pieces that could be played on the organ, they could be played on a harpsichord or a clavichord, or on a forte piano. Of course, he hadn't yet encountered the forte piano when he wrote these pieces, but to some extent the forte piano fulfills certain musical criteria that I think Bach sets out in these pieces. There is a whole discussion about what the well-tempered bit of the title means, because it doesn't mean equal temperament. What it means is that Bach favoured a system of tuning which would enable a keyboard player to play in any key. So, for example, if you were in A-flat minor, a fugue in A-flat minor would still sound okay. It wouldn't sound out of tune, which in certain tuning systems, it would be problematic. So Bach favoured a system where all keys sounded broadly good and where you could modulate. And one aspect of Bach's art is his extraordinary genius for harmony. Beethoven once said of Bach that he was a genius of harmony, not counterpoint, although of course the two are indivisible in Bach's case. And by the way, he is perhaps the only composer in history for whom the vertical, the harmonic idiom is as perfect as the linear. So these two, that line and that line are perfectly realised in his work, so that the contrapuntal element and the harmonic element are entirely wedded together in this perfect synergy. It's quite wonderful. But the main discussion today is really about the nature of creativity, because I think so many people misunderstand the nature of musical invention and imagine that great composers sort of look at the stars or something, get inspired, and hey presto, a symphony comes out. But that's not how it works, really. All composers in history are to some extent technicians. They have immersed themselves in the discipline until they've gained such a level of expertise that they have become entirely proficient. You think of Mozart, why was Mozart so extraordinary? Well, one reason was because his dad made him into a child prodigy. You know, he pretty much forced this kid. And of course, Mozart was obviously talented. His dad realised that, but he was pushed. He was hothoused to the extent that his technical skills were honed in a very, very thorough and disciplined way when he was a child. And that enabled him to become a master musician at a very young age. To some extent, the same is true of Bach. We know that when Bach was kind of on the cusp of adolescence, he carefully smuggled some manuscripts out of a little cabinet in his brother's house and wrote them out by hand. These were manuscripts which revealed aspects of musical craft, counterpoint, harmony, things that he then strove to master. And this is a boy of 11, 12 years old, seeking to master the craft. And it's interesting that the origins of the 48 Preludes and Fugues, the well-tempered clavier, actually can be found in teaching books. The notebooks of Anna Magdalena Bach is one place. In fact, that's the place where the first prelude appears in its final form, before it then becomes the first prelude in the cycle. And it interests me that the Anna Magdalena notebook, this is a notebook full of sort of popular pieces that Bach assembled and wrote in a book for his wife to play on the keyboard. And he also put in it 2 of his own pieces. Well, there may be some of the tiny little pieces maybe by him. There's some debate about that. But there are 2 absolute masterpieces of his in there. One is the first prelude in C major, and the other is the wonderful aria for the Goldberg variations, one of his most beautiful themes. And I find it very touching. There's something very special about the fact that Bach put these wonderful pieces in his wife's notebook, as if they're almost like love letters to her. And isn't it interesting that those 2 pieces, the Prelude in C and the Goldberg aria, both simple pieces for Anna Magdalena to play, then became the basis for these huge cycles. In other words, the Prelude in C, the first of the 48, and then the aria, which then becomes the basis for the 32 wonderful Goldberg variations. Those are 2 transcendentally astonishing masterpieces that grow out of pieces that he wrote for his wife. I find that rather lovely. But actually, we can go back further than the Anna Magdalena book to 1720, when Bach helped his son, Wilhelm Friedmann, his first son, to compile a notebook. It looks as if Wilhelm Friedmann actually copied the music into the notebook. And in that book, we see prototypes for what later becomes some of the preludes that go into the first book of Preludes and Fugues, if you follow me. So we're looking at this absolutely fascinating list. So these are essentially teaching pieces, pieces that he's put into the notebook for his son, is learning to become a proficient keyboard player. Wilhelm Friedmann, of course, became a master musician, a fabulous musician, keyboardist and composer, a genius actually in his own right, rather like at least 3 of Bach's children, Wilhelm Friedmann, Johann Christian, who came to London, Carl Philipp Emanuel. All 3 of them became major composers of the next generation. So in Wilhelm Friedmann's book, you find these wonderful little preludes. Let's have a look at the first one, which later became the C major prelude, the first prelude of the 48. So you'll be able to see on the screen the manuscript of the prelude as it appears in Wilhelm Friedmann's notebook in 1720. And as soon as you see it, you can see that we're not looking at a finished work, really. We're looking at a sort of sketch. There are little amendments, and then you can see at the bottom of the 3rd line, at the bottom of the page there, a bunch of what look like chords. So let's see if we can decode it. And what's so fascinating about this, incidentally, is this whole notion that great masterpieces drop into your brain from heaven is all nonsense. These things arise simply by doing music, spinning out something. There's nothing very special, incidentally, about going like this. I mean, it's a cool groove, because you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. So it's got a kind of built-in syncopation, which is kind of cool. But it is just an arpeggio, and that is in itself just a commonplace musical device. There's nothing clever. It's rather surprising because Bach is normally so contrapuntal. He loves lines of material moving around. But in this case, the lines are there. They're sort of inside the arpeggios. If you play it like this, you can hear the lines moving inside the harmonies, but they're revealed through this sort of arpeggiation. And why is it arpeggiated? Well, it was standard practice in Bach's day for a keyboardist to improvise something in a free style, and then, to show that they were really accomplished, you'd play something in a strict style. So you go from free to strict, and that's the whole point of the Prelude and Fugue, incidentally. The Prelude is a free, improvisatory composition, and often, because instrumental music really began with lutes and theorbos, there's a vestige of that tradition of lute playing, which you can detect in this kind of finger-picking pattern. You know, it is rather like lute music, and you could play it very nicely on a lute, or a guitar for that matter. The Prelude takes an idea, and this often happens in Bach. He'll set up a figuration. It might be that, or it might be the second Prelude does this. So there's a da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, sort of a shape, a little motif, and then it's inversion. Go that way and then that way. Let's take the D major Prelude. Similar thing, you get three notes going up and a drop, three notes going down and a jump. So again, it's a motif and its inversion. And then you take that motif and its inversion, if it has an inversion, on a kind of harmonic journey away from home, often to a sort of rather dangerous place. It's almost like Homer's Odyssey.
No one could stand between my men. And home.
Or it's like Pilgrim's Progress or something. You go on a journey, you come to a place of crisis, you reach the dominant, and that takes you home again. And that is how the Prelude normally maps out. Although later on, the Preludes become more and more sophisticated and complex. And then it's followed by a demonstration of contrapuntal skill, a strict form. So in the case of the C major Prelude, it's followed by this beautiful four-part fugue, which has a kind of vocal character, and the third voice comes, and this perfection of Bach's counterpoint is then revealed. After the riches, the harmonic excitement of the Prelude, you then get the display of technical prowess in the fugue. And we'll look at that fugue in another episode because it's just amazing. So let's look at the Prelude as it originally appeared in Wilhelm Friedman's notebook. The first thing you'll see that's rather weird, but this is often the case with Bach's keyboard music. Do you notice that there isn't a treble clef to be seen here? The left hand is bass clef. You can see the two little dots around the F line, the same as a modern bass clef. But the right hand does not have a treble clef. Instead, you've got those funny lines around the bottom line. That's a C clef, just like this that I was showing you on my t-shirt. So that's a tenor clef, that's an alto clef. The clef here is encircling the bottom line of the stave, and that's C. So middle C is that note that's on that line, and therefore it's this. This is that's middle C. So isn't that weird? So all the notes are sort of shifted up a whole line from where you'd normally expect to see them. So it does test one's sight reading skills, but that's all to the good, isn't it? So let's have a look and see what happens. And it's almost as if Bach's improvising this thing, and I do think that in his case, he was a brilliant improviser. So in his case, it's almost certainly true that improvisation and composition are inextricably linked. He sits down, and any 18th century improviser would, and I'm going to give a demonstration. Shall I do one of my own? So you establish the home key. And off you go and you start to take the piece on a journey. So in Bach's case, he sets up this simple lute-like pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. So you got that lovely, slightly syncopated groove. So that's the same as the final version of the Prelude. Same as the final version. We drop to B, B, C. Now look at this. On the next line, he goes there. Now that's not how the final version works, but do you see there's a tiny little bit with a ring round it? So that's our familiar, yes, he's decided that it needs that before we go to that. Isn't that interesting? So these things don't drop out of heaven. They come to you in the process of working it out, just like anything else. It's just working things out. The same thing happens here. It looks as if originally Bach wrote this. In fact, let's just play through what he did write. I'm going to go from the second line. Right, G7, back to C. So originally wrote this. And then clearly thought that doesn't quite work. So he inserts, do you see that little insertion on the bottom? Which he's written out as chords. He's just written that out. Now what that means is he's basically saying to Wilhelm Friedman, well, you and I both know that this is essentially a chord progression, almost like a chorale, and we're going to play it, but we're going to arpeggiate those chords. So since we've set up this groove, it's clear that the groove is in place, and you simply play those chords in an arpeggiation. So I'm going to go from the bottom line. Here's the inserted bar. That is the same as in the last piece. A, can you see that drop to D? And there's the G major bar. Now that's all the same as in the final version. On we go. Now this is different. And the top of the next page, things start to change. The whole trajectory of the piece is altered actually. So it's all been very familiar up to that point. Right, we turn over the page. And something different happens, sort of G major 7. I'm going to play these as chords at the moment. That's diminished, going to D minor. Then the dominant 7th comes back to C. Then we get F7. This is a little bit like the final version. G7. Right, G7 with a C in the bass, but this is surprising. Tonic 7th. I mean, the final Prelude does do something like this, but it isn't quite the same, is it? F7, right, D minor 7, and then the dominant 7th, tonic, second version, Sus4, and then the dominant 7th, and resolution. A vastly simpler version of the harmonic journey from the version that we all know. And what I'll do now is I'm going to play it with the arpeggiation so you see how it works. So let's go from the top. There's the inserted bar and the second inserted bar, and back to, this is where the chords kick in. Over the page. Well, vastly simpler, and you'll notice it then says Preludium 2, and lo and behold, It is the second prelude of the 48, and I think we'll find as we go on through this, the next one, yes, the next one is the D minor. It doesn't do the C sharp major or C sharp minor, but there's the D minor. So these are all prototypes for the final set. Fascinating, but without the fugues and missing some of the sharp keys. So the fascinating thing with this prelude is how does he elaborate it? Because the points at which the elaboration occurs, particularly on that second page, I think probably reveal to us aspects of Bach's genius. So what we've established is the first page of the prelude with the inserted bars is basically the same as the final version, but once we turn the page it's different, interestingly. So let's go from the point where it starts changing, which is... Oh, so let's look at that. We'll go from the final bar where it's the same, and that's this G major bar. Now, the 11th bar is essentially the halfway point in the form. Bach's preludes are all in a version of binary form, which is to say that they all travel from the tonic, C major, to the dominant, G major. I'm pretty sure that this is true of all of them. But you, my wonderful community, can tell me if there are any preludes that don't do this, but I'm pretty sure they virtually all do, and there probably are one or two exceptions. But essentially you have a journey from tonic to dominant, and then a journey back. But the journey back from dominant to tonic is normally more tumultuous, you go through more adventures. In this original draft, the return from the dominant is pretty easy. So we reach the dominant, and just playing through those chords, the chords he's written, we go to D minor, we C, and that's a rather wonderful subversion of what you'd expect, because you expect a resonation, but you don't get it. You go to the subdominant, and then you resolve. Right, now let's see what happens in the final version. We're going from 11. It does something immediately different. Going to D minor, and then coming round to C major. Now, is that radically different from what he originally did? There's a diminished chord, going to D minor, so essentially the same, and then turning back to C. I think what's apparent though in the final version is it just flows better. The counterpoint is more natural, the melody, the sense of melody within the thing seems more fluent. And this is the same. If we look at the final version, it does that. Is that the same as in the original? No, it isn't. It resolves to that, and then it goes to the dominant seventh. So again, it's more fluent, isn't it? In that the final version, you get this lovely, gorgeous suspension, dropping to D minor 7, and then the dominant seventh, much stronger progression to here. And he doesn't immediately go to C7. He lands on C and then C7, the bar later. Now that is the same as in the original. Do you notice the difference? C7, F in the original, D, he doesn't have that, and then G. Now look, this is this masterly moment in the final version where you go from C7, see what he does this time. He doesn't go straight to the dominant, he goes chromatically, that wonderful F sharp, diminished. Look at this bar. That's a genius bar. I'll tell you why. It's so weird and sort of, he loves this kind of thing. It has a distorted quality. The arpeggios have turned into scales. Do you see that? Adjacent notes. Instead of being triads, like the other bars, where there's triads, they're all kind of scrunched up into a little ball. That's fabulous, isn't it? And the way that the harmony's working, if I play these as chords, the bass doesn't go. That's exactly what any contemporary Bach would have done. You got F sharp, and then skirts round the dominant, doesn't go there, but goes A flat, with that B in it, isn't that marvelous? And then so dissonant and weird, and then lands on the G. So the effect of it is this sort of curious journey approaching the dominant from below and then above to G7. Now in the original, once we hit G7, he has G7, C, the suspension, the dominant seventh, and he finishes. So it's incredibly concise. And then the last bar, however that would be realised, perhaps like I've just done it. He extends this. Bach does this kind of thing. The Fifth Brandenburg Concerto does this. The original keyboard cadenza in that piece is relatively short, and then later on he went back to it and enlarged it enormously by delaying the final cadence. And this is what you get here. He's a real genius for delaying things. It's a dramatic device, really. So let's see how that works. I mean, this has been delayed, hasn't it? The arrival to the dominant has been delayed. And by the way, composers out there, delaying things, put things off. Don't arrive at the expected time. Hint at arrival and then delay it and keep the thing going, keep the tension until the exciting moment happens. We've got F sharp, we've got A flat, and then we've got G7. Now he builds up this wonderful thing on the dominant, C major, the suspension, just like in the original, G7, but instead of the resolution he originally had, he pushes the tension higher to there, the diminished, over that G pedal, second inversion, and then the suspension again. And again, you're thinking, okay, so we're going to resolve there, but no, he does this. He flattens that C, so you have a C7. We're pushing now towards a sort of wonderful subdominant. He breaks the arpeggiation, has a freer ending. There's G7 with the seventh in the bass, and we resolve. So this is all about extending your material, exploring it, exhausting all its possibilities, pushing it to the ultimate degree so that you get maximum tension, maximum drama out of the journey. And the whole trajectory of the piece in the final version is really infinitely richer and more expressive. So now, and I think all that remains to be done now is to play the final version so that you can hear everything I've explained about the evolution of the piece manifesting in this wonderful way. And just to say, if you like the channel, please like and subscribe. And if you're feeling generous, please consider donating to the channel, either with a one-off donation, or you can become part of our wonderful community of patrons and members. And the details of how to join the channel in that capacity are in the video description below.